the blockchain startup class. I'm Mana, the course coordinator for the class, and we have Tim, who is our GSI, as well as Dan, who is going to be, he's our technical instructor for those of you guys in the other class. So he is going to be here on AirMeet. Typically, he teaches remotely from Denver, Colorado, so that's very exciting. Actually, we can go over there. Dan, if you want to say hi to the class.
Yeah, so I guess I can stop presenting and say hi to everybody. Hey guys, so yeah, I'm Dan Shields, and my day job, for those who aren't familiar with my background, I do work with Parity Technologies. So I primarily work with Substrate's a blockchain building framework, and there I help people understand how to use this tool primarily, as I'm learning how to use it myself. So if you want to build blockchains, I want to talk to you. But outside of that, I'm really engaged in the community here in Colorado in particular. This is all kind of around education and evangelism of cryptocurrency and blockchain technologies in general. So what we are doing in this DApp course, which I'm glad we have you guys joining from the blockchain developer side, is building out a minimum viable startup here. Right. So this is all about entrepreneurship, is applying those skills really that you have in the blockchain development space and actually building out really cool applications, right? Or dApps, right? As we call them colloquially. So welcome. I'm glad you guys are here. And I'm glad that our class gets to meet you, because I know that we have a lot of really cool like CS and EECs who are here that have some semblance to what you guys are doing, but I bet you can trade some notes and learn from each other. So, and with that, I'm really excited to have Nate here to kind of bridge the gap and talk about like next steps. I don't want to like take away your thunder, man. You got some really cool things to talk about tonight, and I think it'll be valuable for everybody, both classes here.
Great. Awesome. Okay, so with that, we can go ahead and get started and give Nate a round of applause. Woo! Awesome. Okay. All right. I'll make sure to share screen. And all right, let's do it.
Okay. Thanks for the introduction, and it's great to be here. So thank you. So to kick it off, just so I can get a little bit of a sense, can you raise your hand if you're in the DApp class, just so we can figure out who's in which class? Okay, if you're in the DApp, and then if you're in blockchain for developers, just show of hands there too. Okay, great. So we have a pretty even split. So we might have, if we have a little bit of time towards the end, we might transition into a little discussion between the classes, and so you can hear a little bit about what you've been doing or what the other class has been doing and see what you can take from that. So today, I'll be kicking it off and I'll talk about, well, first off, congrats on all of your hard work so far. I know you've been working the whole semester on your products and your dApps and learning a ton that comes with it. And it's not an easy task to build out a dApp. And we'll see that, I mean, for everyone in the dApp class, there might be a little bit of review for things that you've done, but that'll cater towards more to the blockchain for developers students, and then for the and then we will transition and draw some things that might be new for you that the blockchain for developer students might already know. So just to kick it off, here's a little bit about me. So actually, here's the plan for today. So the goal for this lecture is to explain and kind of give some insights. So I'll talk about my background in a little bit, but my goal is to give some of the insights and help you prevent some of what I've seen as being some of the most common mistakes with taking your MVP or your dApp to the next level. And so kind of from here and beyond, we'll demonstrate some ways that, like things to avoid, but also ways to try to have as smooth a sailing as possible. So let's kick it off. So here's a little bit about me. So my name is Nate Pola. I am a junior here at Cal, and I'm a member of Blockchain at Berkeley. So in Blockchain at Berkeley, I reside mostly in the education department. And so that comes from teaching the blockchain fundamentals course. I led that all of the past year. And other than that, I've done a little bit in the research department and other things here and there. And then another thing that's associated with blockchain at Berkeley is the Berkeley Blockchain Accelerator. And so this is a kind of like an incubator, but it is a startup accelerator for blockchain startups. And it provides resources, mentorship, guidance, and overall support for these teams over the course of a year to develop their blockchain companies. And so we actually had our batch kickoff earlier today for all the newest batch. And so this is kind of like the new start of the term, and we'll see. And if you're still interested in the blockchain space, come November, feel free to come check out the demo day. You'll see all the progress, and we'll see what these companies are up to. So something that's kind of the next big kind of piece that I'm going to be talking about a little bit in this class will be from Chain. So I worked for a kind of a dApp company. It's a dApp startup, which I worked with or interned with last year. And I focused more on the educational markets. And so finding ways to expand blockchain classes, different programs, and overall teaching into technical and non-technical classroom environments. And so that comes from a mix of encouraging and finding ways to improve blockchain programs in universities, and also incorporating smart contracts and development and overall kind of more technical blockchain knowledge into schools, while also providing tools that are available for less different non-technical majors. So maybe let's say history or economics or business, where they don't necessarily need to use coding or blockchain knowledge, but finding ways to incorporate smart contracts and blockchain technologies into that. And then the other thing I've been involved with as well is the East department. So I'm currently doing research in DAOs and stakeholder incentives. So figuring out ways to optimize proposals and so this is all in the field of DeFi governance, but finding ways to optimize governance proposals so that they can get the highest levels of the highest levels for proposals to pass, and to align stakeholder incentives for all different stakeholders who participate in governance. And if you've heard, I don't know if you've heard of this other class, but I was involved with the decentralized finance class, which took place last semester. So this was the first semester that it was really taught, and I was a GSI for that. And so I'll try to touch on all these different experiences. And if you have questions about any of these in relation to what I covered today, or questions in general, feel free to ask questions. And so I'll be pausing for questions throughout the course of the lecture. So feel free to ask whatever you'd like. So great. So let's just start off with a little bit of what you've done, and let's take a step back to appreciate where you've come so far. And so about a few months ago, let's say in January, you started off, maybe you knew what a dApp was, maybe you didn't, but for all of you, you all developed a lot of really solid skills and a foundation for building out these technical products. And as you probably learned, it's no easy task, especially because there's so many other factors beyond basic web dev or what we experience in a non-blockchain or in a centralized setting. And so we'll get into a bit here. So, and some of these are going to apply more just to general startups ideas or apps, dApps, whatever it may be. But these are important considerations to take in mind. So at the start, when you are planning a dApp, like you all know, what I like to do and something that's been really effective is finding a challenge or space for improvement in your own life. And so this also comes from the lean startup, which describes ways to address pretty much ways to make your quality of life better. And so at least this is how I've always approached different dApps or different ideas, whatever they may be. What is a problem in your life you want to improve? And so is this something that other people experience? Is this something that's relatable to not just you or your close community, but does it spread a much wider ground? And then I guess something that's more applicable to this class is, can that be solved with an app or with a dApp? So going in from there, one of the biggest pitfalls I see is blockchain fever. And it's the idea that blockchain is such a new technology, and you hear blockchain this, blockchain that all over the place. And for most of us, for most people outside of this classroom who may not know exactly what blockchain is or how it can be used in whatever capacity it is, they hear it and they want to use it somehow. And a lot of the times you don't necessarily need blockchain. And so people kind of hopped on this craze of thinking that blockchain can be used all the time and it should be used, but that's not always the case. And so a lot of the times, I was involved with, I've been involved with kind of the application process for Accelerator teams. And the number one concern that came from that, or the reason why teams were declined or denied, was that their use case didn't need blockchain. And so before you go into anything with dApp development, the most important component is to figure out if you even need blockchain. And then just kind of diving into a few themes from there. So the first one, and these are just kind of general themes that can be used to understand, and it's kind of a loose evaluation of if something can use blockchain or if it should use it. So if you're looking for increased security of information, if you want a way where everyone can be held accountable, and going into that where everything is transparent. So not only do you want there to be a lot more, you want people to be held accountable, but more than that, you're looking for a situation where more than people, the whole system and all the code, everything involved with the ecosystem can be held accountable and can be checked, and people can keep each other in check to make sure that we have the highest level of security possible. And so that comes from transparency. A lot of times, if we have a lot of moving components, and this is what I just described, and kind of in more Ethereum terms, like you have an idea of a state change-based model. And so if you have like a lot of updates, or you have ideas of like an overall state that it has to be updated or changed, then it could be helpful to use a blockchain solution. If you want to give more data ownership to their users, so rather than having one database or centralized party, company, whatever it may be, in charge of your information, if you want users to be all on the same playing field and want to have like ownership and accessibility over their information, then over the data, then blockchain could be the way to go. And also this idea that open source leads to more trust. And so pretty much what I've found, at least, is dApps that are afraid to release their code raises a lot of red flags, because a lot of the time having your code open source promotes trust and reliability. And that's what you need most importantly, is to create a sense of trust for people to use your network, your protocol, your dApp, whatever it may be. Because if people don't trust it, then there's a very low likelihood of them wanting to use it. And so we saw this a little while ago with Facebook, where we saw that data wasn't as secure and private as we thought it would be, and we saw what happened with different price, like stocks and like Facebook shares, and just overall like feelings towards them is that there's a little bit more concern and apprehension towards the future of Facebook just purely because of trust. So here's, so I have a few things that all the slides are posted online, by the way, and then for the dev students, I'll send over the link to Nozzle to pass on to all of you. But I've thrown in a few resources here and there that I won't necessarily fully touch on, but there's some cool resources to check out if you want to consider, let's say you want to start over or you want to pass this on, whatever it may be. This is just a little flowchart that describes when exactly you would, or when should or can you use a blockchain. And so the answer is I'd say you can almost always use one, but you shouldn't always use one. And so here's a little flowchart to describe, well, like a few different questions that should hopefully help with your decision making if blockchain or dApp is useful over just a normal app. So like you've all seen, more than just a traditional full stack infrastructure, I mean, one of the biggest challenges that comes with blockchain is the fact that it is so decentralized. And one of the mission statements to it, one of the initial learning reasons why it's gained so much traction is that we have the idea that that you don't need to trust anyone in particular. You can just trust the underlying structure and infrastructure for the system to run well. And so it's the idea of trust without the trust. You can trust the code and that everything will run smoothly without having to trust another person. And so as we've seen, rather than just a traditional full stack infrastructure, whatever it may be, we have these other components that add more complications. And I'm sure you've all seen over the course of this term that kind of incorporating even one more component is really difficult. And so in most cases, we don't have as many nodes. We don't have this idea of public nodes or even wallets. These are all components that come into play in a completely new setting with blockchain and dApp development. And so we'll get into a little bit about how we can use this to our advantage. And because at least for me, I know when I started working with dApps, it seemed like a hassle to incorporate all these components because they're just added steps. It's more lines of code. It's a lot more to have to deal with. But what it comes down to is that if you structure your dApps correctly, you can, and which I'll get into in a bit, you can use these components to your advantage and make your dApps so much more attractive to other potential users. And that can give yourself a competitive edge over whatever other companies you might be competing against. So, okay. So now, I mean, I'm just going to speed through this a little bit, but so let's say when you're approaching your dApp, I'm sure a question that a lot of you had. I'm assuming, did most of you just work with Ethereum this semester? Okay. So moving forward, there are a lot of pros and cons to other different blockchains that you can use. And so I wrote a few here. I won't get into them too much, but what I like to do is address the factors that come specifically to the dApp, and then from there, use that information to inform which blockchain will work best. And a lot of the times Ethereum's industry standard for the most part, but there are a lot more options out there to explore if you're interested in making another dApp or checking out other blockchains to work with. And so kick it off, the first one, and that's what's tricky too, is there's no blanket statement or overall blockchain to use because a lot of the times you can get slight benefits from using or you can get benefits from using other blockchains purely based off of what your project looks like. And so these are a few that I normally keep in mind when I am working with dApps. So how many transactions do you need? That's always key, because if you have something that has a large backlog of transactions and you can't actually produce the output that you're looking for, then that can be detrimental to your dApp. Longevity. And so a lot of the times older dApps and older blockchains have more resources out there. And so if you're starting off and you want to explore a new one, it could be helpful to explore a different blockchain that has more support to it. And so, I mean, you just think about different Stack Overflow resources. If you want to be able to interact with, if you want to try something new, whatever it may be, the longer a protocol has been around or a blockchain, the more experience that will be out there and the more advice. And kind of something that goes on with that, and it's a little bit connected, is reputability. And so just like trust is so important for all of your dApps and for users to trust that the dApps and everything will work the way it's planned and worked in a way that's honest for everyone, that goes for blockchains as well. Because if you don't trust a blockchain, odds are slim that you're going to want to use it. And so another thing to keep in mind, which is similar to transactions per second, but is scalability. And so if you're looking to scale, I mean, it all depends on what your vision is. And so that's another theme that I'll get into in a little bit, but diving into what you're looking to next and how you want to, what your next step is from this class. Because let's give it 2 weeks and then you'll be done with this class, maybe all finals, but from there you can decide where you want to take your dApp, if you want to start over and make a new one, or if you want to do something completely different. And so depending on what route you're looking for, you can use these different components, and scalability at least is a big one that will influence where your dApp will go. And then even something like number of active nodes, that adds to reliability as well. So I guess that could be like a sub point, but the more active nodes you have, the more it's pretty much like a safety net, because you know that each active node provides one extra measure of security if something were to go wrong. And so it's the more nodes you have, the bigger the network, the more you can trust the network, at least if you think it's acting honestly. So I'm gonna skip these right now, but these are all on the slides online. But these are just a few pros and cons of all of them. Okay, and I threw in Polkadot there for Dan, so Dan's working on Substrate, so could give some input there. So now let's imagine we figured out our blockchain. Now it depends on which components we want to use and what else we want to explore. And so I'm guessing that you've all gotten like a pretty standard set of tools to work with for this dApp project, but there's a lot more out there. And as blockchain and the blockchain space becomes more popular, so does the amount of libraries or other open source resources for developers to use. And now what we see as well is that a lot of companies or DAOs are centered around providing resources and providing support for developers to expand upon their initial, to expand upon like the initial set of tools that they have to work with. And so it's all about increasing functionality and essentially allowing for blockchain development to become more common practice, because it is much less common. And I guess because of that, it's good you're all getting in pretty early, because then if you're looking for a job in the blockchain space, they're pretty lucrative. So keep that in mind. But in general, once you figure out your components that you want to talk about and incorporate in your dApp, well, actually I'm gonna pause here for questions. So I know that was a lot, but does anyone have any questions about anything there? Yeah.
What are like the I guess like less technical like career paths in like
Yeah. So I'd say outside of being a developer, the ones that are pretty common are more in the biz dev sales space. Those are pretty solid roles. I know that design has actually that's been on the uprise too. And so if you imagine, just think about your dApp right now. So you have let's say you have the engineering side and there's like the developers. What else might you need for a dApp to be successful? If you think about that, you can see that you might want to hire someone on the outreach side. And so whatever that results in, or operations, or essentially anything that, like in the same way that startups or companies have more than just like engineering roles, that's the same with dApps too, and with blockchain companies. And so there are always roles, even things like community involved. I forgot the exact term is, but ways to like community engagement and finding ways to incorporate your company or product into the blockchain space and even outside of the blockchain space. So into the community and like different, something actually I've been considering going into is more of an educational role. And so maybe for new hires, so that's like maybe recruiting or teaching like new hires who aren't maybe on the blockchain team about blockchain and being there for support and being a resource for them. And so there's a lot more out there that you can take from even your experience from this semester that can be effective in wherever you go.
I want to add on to that actually. There are like two more goals that I would say. So first is venture capital. There's a lot of like great blockchain like VC firms coming out, and they're like looking for people that can like analyze the market and the fit and like look at a startup and see like how much is the startup worth, like what's its growth potential. So although this can be a little bit technical, it's a lot more like business oriented. And secondly, there are also community managers. So it's really a big part about like blockchain or a lot of protocols is to like cultivate your community. Because like if you as a protocol have like a strong group of people behind it and they're willing to stick by it, that is something that is very valuable. And that's something that like a lot of protocols and NFTs have kind of like pivoted towards. So a lot of like they're looking for people to help like run discords and basically like manage the community around the product.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, that community manager, that was the phrase I was forgetting. I was spacing on that. Thank you. All right, any other questions for now? No?
Yeah, online so far, so good.
Okay, great. That's good. Okay, so we'll get into some next steps from here. So now you've already created your dApp and by next week, I believe you'll have your MVP fully ready to go. And so from here, now I'll get into, and so a lot of what I did at Simba was interacting with early stage MVP dApps and figuring out how we could, like where they could go to take their product even further. And from there, even figuring out what not to do. And so I'll dive into a bit about what I've seen during that experience. And then this will be, and I'll stop for questions after this section. So, kind of general next steps that apply to anything, but that are still important to keep in mind. So the first one is to try to find a way to gather quantifiable data from your MVP. And so you, of course, as we probably all heard, you want to balance like your numerical and more qualitative data, but you want to do this so you can provide metrics and figure out how your performance is compared to other periods, like other time periods or other companies as well. And so you can find ways to improve and track your improvement. Because if you don't know how to progress from here, then it can be difficult to even establish next steps or go from there in general. And so something else too that's pretty cool about dApps is because everything is so scattered. I mean, it's kind of more metaphorically speaking, everything in a dApp is more decentralized and more scattered. You can use more than like traditional factors, like traditional traditional app factors to measure progress. And so a lot of times, something that I've seen come up, and I only heard it from like one dApp that was using it, but I don't fully, actually still to this day, understand exactly how they did it. But the kind of the gist is they used location and they were able to use that, not like they used a combination of nodes, like where nodes were located, and also dApp users, and created like hotspots close to where like nodes were set up to increase community like involvement. And so I can look into that and then give you some more information if anyone's interested. And so that's just the first step, is using quantifiable data in general, or just using, just general data that you can use to track improvement and growth, and then expand and refine your front end. And the question, and one of the biggest challenges actually that comes up, at least from what I've seen in the blockchain space, is this. So how can you provide all the benefits of blockchain technologies without the complications? And so that's minimizing all the barriers to entry that come from whether it's creating a wallet or finding a way to hop online. And I generally think that the biggest way, like the most effective use of this, was Coinbase, in the way that they were able to make crypto trading accessible to everyone. And they got in early and they were able to expand. And now we've seen progression that they've had over the years. And so that's a great example of a team that's been able to make like blockchain accessible to everyone in the same way that a non-blockchain or traditional market might do so. And so if you can, and this is a question that I would say, like a mentality that I'd stick with when you're looking to revise your dApp, and because it essentially if you find this and use it as the crux for your analysis, then you're able to make improvements that only improve the user experience, more so than just something looking pretty, but making it actually tangibly easier for people to join and start using and adopting your use case. And so keep this in mind if you're looking to expand. And then this is something that'll look familiar to the dev class, but generally actually a challenge that comes up with dApps as well is that there's no, once something's already put on a blockchain, there's no way to take it off, really. And so when you update it, you have to find different ways to update your code and use different contracts to help yourself to make changes. Because just as you, and that can be one of the challenges with blockchain, is that once you do add something to it, you might want it to update it, revise it, whatever it may be. And so making sure that you can keep using different contracts and like understanding the ways to which you can update your code is really important. And then this is something that goes more towards, and actually this will go more towards the kind of the business outreach, non-technical side, which is a little bit different here. And so for starters, going to outreach, keep in mind as you're going through what your philosophy and your mission is. So for starters, like what is it that you want your dApp to achieve? What is the problem you're trying to solve, and how are you going to keep this at the forefront of the product the whole time? And upside, like another side point to that is, who is it geared towards? How are you going to figure out your user base? Like, who are your first 100 customer or first 100 clients or users of your dApp? From there, how do you expand? What markets do you want to expand into? Where do you want to specialize if it comes down to that? Are there more niche markets you can hit? All these questions help you to find and hone in on the markets that are best suited to you. And from there, once you have a very core user base, you can slowly find ways to expand it. And it's in a way, it's like pottery, because if you're throwing a pot and you're sculpting it, you don't want to push it too tight so it smushes, but you also don't want it to fall apart outwards. And so it's very much a give and take when it comes down to figuring out who your market is and your outreach. And then ownership as well. So that's a key component of dApps, decentralized apps, is that they're decentralized. And so at the same time, something that we see with a lot of protocols is that they aren't always fully as decentralized as they say they are. And they might have some provisional parties or other certain users that have more power than others. And so there's no answer all across there's no like blanket statement for a way to establish this, or to establish how much power everyone should have or can't have. And so I'll dive into a few components here. So if you want, let's just say if you want the last say, then you might want, at least for now, to have some sort of like pause functionality in case something unexpected happens. But on the other side of that, if you want pure decentralization, then you can find a way to gradually give users more power, so that in a few months, a few years, however long it may be, you can kind of abstract yourself out of the process, and now it's fully in the hands of the community. And that way you can shift your responsibility in the dApp away from yourself and into the community. And so a few other things too, and this is also something that'll lead into the next slide, but this talks about overall like ownership. And so who's going to be your initial party who has power to update these smart contracts or make changes to the network? Is it a single owner or user? And at the start, that's kind of what it has been for most of you, because you're the ones who've been kicking off this program, or you've been working on this development. And from there, it's been more multiple users because you've been working in teams. But would it make sense to have some provisionary governing council, or do you want to work your way? And I'd say in most cases, the goal should be to work your way more towards like a horizontal hierarchical structure, which just means that you have more. That means like everyone has very similar power, and there aren't many levels of authority. Instead, it's pretty flat. So, a few things as well. So, by show of hands, did any of you use how did any of you use tokens in your dApps? Just like in a few words, nothing too crazy. But did anyone use tokens in their dApps? Yeah. Okay. How'd you use that, or what would you use it for? NFT minting. Okay.
PIP 2981.
Okay.
Also thinking about implementing like co-op.
What was that?
Co-op.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just so overall for NFTs. Yeah.
I hold a lot of statues, and I use my dApp to help me do that.
Oh, how so?
It's pretty complicated, honestly, to understand in like layman's terms. But honestly, I can't really explain it here, but
So maybe more of like a tokenization of your statues. Okay, so maybe so was that more distribution, or probably?
Yeah,
okay.
more dev related. Yeah, really,
Cool. Okay, well, pretty much just what we see is the way tokens are used and distributed can be really important and influential in your in the way that your protocols run, and it all comes from the philosophy as well. And so these are 3 different tactics that you can keep in mind, or maybe longer term missions when you are building out and distributing tokens. And so the first just comes, these are kind of three terms. The first comes from a fair launch. And so this is making sure that whales or people who have a lot of money can't just buy the tokens, like a bunch of tokens from your protocol. And this comes from finding a way to distribute your tokens, or however you want to distribute power or like overall authority in your dApp or network by a way other than direct sale. And so some ways to do this, and some ways that we've seen as pretty effective, are rewards programs for early users. So those who get in early and can refer other people, so like referral incentives. And that's all done to eliminate like big firms from buying the majority of the purchasing power or tokens or whatever it may be from a network or from a dApp. And so another approach, and so these aren't all mutually exclusive. These are three different, like if you imagine like a triple Venn diagram where there's a little bit of overlap, it's helpful to shoot for the middle and find the space where you can touch on all three of these for the most part. The next overall trend is growth marketing. And so this is finding a way to encourage goal-oriented decisions and user-specific behavior. And so it's finding a way to implicitly, as the developers, as the core team, the founders, whoever it may be, encouraging your users to exhibit a certain behavior or to act a certain way or to distribute or to just pretty much run the network in the way that you yourself would want to run it if you could control it all without needing to be the one to do it. And so it allows for decentralization, but it also allows for your core philosophy and mission to be applied. And so these are just ways to structure rewards so that you can influence user behavior. Yeah.
Can you get an example of growth marketing?
Yeah, so a lot of it comes from, so just think about different ways that so the underlying foundation for why anyone participates in anything I'd say in life, oh, actually that's a little too deep. The underlying incentive for anything is profit. So everyone comes into the DeFi space or participates in a dApp, plays a game to try to make money, try to make profits, and actually do something that's worthwhile for that. And so if you can structure rewards, and this is more general, but if you want to do this where you have, and this might come from, like an example could be if you have a council of, let's say, 5 different users, and this might be at the beginning when you're still transitioning into full decentralization because you want to make sure that you can ease your dApp or your community into what you're looking for. When you're looking for this, you can create an incentive, like you have like someone who is on like a council of 5 people every time, let's say we have an election every however long, every year or so, and then those who are elected on the council like will be rewarded if they make sure that tokens are distributed fairly, if the system stays up and it doesn't makes updates to attacks. And essentially in the same way that like a president of a country is elected, and if they want to be reelected, we look back at the actions of the past term to influence their future. And if we think they'd be a good president, it's similar with this. And so we can find ways to structure maybe other nodes or other people who have a higher concentration of tokens. It's tricky because there are a lot of different approaches to it. So if you want, we can talk a little more after. But essentially rewarding good behavior and doing this, like rewarding good behavior, and not only good behavior, but behavior that is aligned with what the founders would want. And so you can find ways in your smart contracts to distribute tokens, which are essentially money for users if they act the way you want them to act. So did that answer it all? Okay, great. And then the last one is the idea of programmatic decentralization. And so this is something I mentioned a little bit earlier, kind of hinted at, but it's the idea, and this should be, in most cases, the way that you'd want to approach your dApps, and it's a way to transition towards full community ownership. And so some ways you can do this are to slowly give away more, like you give away power so that you as a core team has less and less power, but you transition it to trustworthy individuals or addresses nodes in your network or in the blockchain that you're interacting with. And so what this happens, it's kind of in the way that you might start, well, they're all pretty similar in a sense that they're all looking to gradually, rather than just throwing someone into full decentralization and creating a network right off the bat that has it, it's gradually introducing it so that you can steer the direction that you're looking for your dApp without having to have any more power than anyone else. And so these are things you can keep in mind for how you want to distribute tokens or just overall power to your network or to your dApp network. And so by doing things like this, you can set the tone for how you want your dApp to run. And so this is why these can be so effective, is because these are all pretty like kind of almost subconscious profit-driven strategies that can be used to creating and molding what you want out of your dApp without having to do it yourself. And then another, so after, it's like these are all kind of going systematically, but this one should be, I mean, this is something that might come up after MVP, but really taking a look at how you want to balance your on-chain and off-chain activities. Because as we can see, on-chain activities there are a lot of downsides to them. And so like versus just a traditional structure that has a database, there's a lot less to work with here. At least if you look pretty simply, a lot of what you're looking for can be done directly. And so rather than having to the chalkboard, so I mean, like in the traditional setting, if we have a database here, we have all of our nodes connecting and interacting with our individual database here. That being said, rather than just having one central node, we see in blockchains, we have so much more to work with, and that adds a lot more complexity. So finding ways to balance what you have on-chain and off-chain is the best way to save money and to save, pretty much just save hassle, because once you identify these components, then you'll see how much it'll make everything easier in simple terms. And so I'm getting into a few things here that I've personally seen as these are all balances that have been imbalanced in the past in different dApps, and that these are some of the things I look for when I advise people about how to change their own dApps. And so the first thing, like as we know, anything that's off-chain is generally cheaper, faster, and more private. And so this last point here has a caveat that if something's more private, that goes against the idea of decentralization. And so that's just naturally why having everything on-chain is really the biggest way to have full decentralization. But we want to keep in mind that there are some things that we can have off-chain, and they won't make the community upset, or they won't result in any issues that are too large. And so a lot of times we consider any of these, but the biggest one is, I'd say, that is misused is like data and file storage. And this comes from really stepping back, maybe even like taking some time away from examining your dApp and figuring out what exactly do you really actually need on chain? Because a lot of times if you have a bunch of files, it can add up, it can be really slow and expensive. And so taking a step back at data and file storage, that's the biggest one. Scalability, actually I'll dive into a little bit about scalability now, but there are other solutions that can be used off-chain, and there are pros and cons to both of them. But that's another component for if you're looking to expand into different regions or even just to scale the size of your project. And then transactions, that's a little bit iffy. It's a little more iffy, but there is the option to have some transactions off-chain, and you can consider that as well. So I'll just go like one quick on-chain and off-chain example. So something we see here, which is pretty common, is the idea of sharding. And so you can think of it as, in a sense, like parallel computing. It's the idea of splitting up information and allowing that to be used in being able to split up and then merge back together. And so this just speeds up your runtime and is a pretty effective solution. With that being said, we can implement things that are just beyond the blockchain layer, or that are kind of in the sense like superimposed. And so we have our blockchain and consensus layers, but here we also have, if we want to do something off-chain, we can implement something called lightning networks. And so these are great because, and there are pros and cons to it, but these are effective because you're able to use all the nodes you have and find the shortest path and use the quantity to your advantage. And so the more you have in the more nodes you have, typically that just seems like that would seem more problematic in any kind of other traditional, at least I'd say like in most computer science backgrounds, because it's just slower runtime. But you can use this to your advantage and find the shortest paths and have everyone interact with each other in a different way. And so if you're interested about this, you can come talk to me. I won't dive into it too much, but the point I wanted to highlight here is that scalability there are effective scalability solutions on and off chain, but it's all about what you're looking for in regards to your project. Okay, and I'll just leave this out here. You can check this out on the slides, but these are some pros and cons there. Okay, one of the last things I'm going to dive into is dApp monetization. And so at a certain point, you're going to want to make money for your dApp. I mean, that's why a lot of times just as users are incentivized by profit, so are you. And so these are some ways these are some approaches you can take for monetizing your dApps. So the first is adopting a subscription model. And this comes from having a monthly, yearly fee that comes from using your dApp. And this can be, a lot of times, initially, this can be this can deter people from wanting to use your dApp if they have to pay money for it. And so this is something that comes later on once your dApp has gained a lot of traction. So just kind of from a starting perspective, something that can be effective too is balancing an open source and protected code. And so you want to make your code as accessible as possible for people to view and check and audit, but you also don't want to make it anything that you don't want it to be vulnerable. And because then if you develop a great idea and you're able to code it all out, and if it's not licensed or protected, then someone can take it. And so making sure you balance and protect your code in all ways you can. And that goes with your dApps too. Something else, which it tends to be pretty effective, and at least for more startups and earlier stage products, is adapting a light version versus a premium model. And so it's essentially drawing in users, giving them a taste of what they can have, and then realizing how they can take this in the future and progress if they do have the premium model. And so this isn't always like a direct correlation here, but something that I've seen, like an approach I've seen being used, is using an MVP, like an early stage product, as the light version. So of course you want to clean up other components, but you want to save your advanced functionality for a premium model. And so I'd say generally like your perks and your dApp feature upgrades, you want to add those to the premium version. But the exception for things that you'll want to keep adding to the light version would be security, runtime, like user experience, and other just general foundational improvements that will allow for ease of access. Because at the end of the day, ease of access is what will entice people to use your product. And now funding. So the great thing about the blockchain space is that blockchain companies and startups, protocols want to help blockchain developers. And we've seen that now even more recently because there's so many resources that get compiled into that are offered for blockchain developers. And so a lot of times even too with DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, they create and fundraise and support blockchain core developers or other contributors. And so something that comes from this too is if you can find, and this is why keeping your philosophy is so important, is because if you can figure out what your philosophy is for your dApp and find other companies that align for it, and then if they're giving out money, then it's a no-brainer for them to support you, and then you can have a partnership or sponsorship, whatever it may be, to continue evolving, expanding your team, diving into new resources, whatever it may be. So there's a lot of potential there. And then also advertising could be something a little more down the line, but that's also that has potential. And I know a lot of times like intrusive advertisements can be problematic and they can deter people as well. But finding ways to have non-intrusive advertisements based off of the other companies can be, that's a way to balance making revenue, but also making revenue from ads, but also not deterring users from using your dApp. And the last thing I'll get into in a sec is make the most of Berkeley, because Berkeley has the best blockchain ecosystem in the world. And I'll get into some of the resources and ways that you can expand just beyond building dApps, but where you can go from here if you're still, and I hope you are, if you're still interested in the blockchain space. And hopefully this lecture doesn't scare you off from blockchain hopefully it's not too boring. So one thing you can do, and this is what a lot of teams have done in the past, a lot of these SCET companies have applied to the Accelerator. And so this is the Berkeley Blockchain Accelerator. And every batch we have anywhere from 1 to 3 student teams. So, and these are all students that have either built a dApp or product on their own, or they're ones that have come from classes. And so my first blockchain internship was with a team called Calypso, which was 3 years ago. And it was an Accelerator team that started off in a class just like this. It was a team that worked together for the whole semester and realized, well, maybe we can find a way. So it was a fintech blockchain reverse lending startup that aimed towards making lends more accessible to just the general public. And they did this through, look, the kind of mission was that banks already make so much money off of loans that usually like normal people don't really realize it, but people who ask for loans don't realize the power that they have. And so maybe instead of having people looking for loans, instead of people looking for loans, reaching out to banks and having to compete for loans, we can flip this process and instead have banks compete for the lowest prices and establishing and kind of leveling the playing field for lenders and borrowers. And so this is an idea that kind of focused on it emphasized community empowerment, especially within the financial industry. And from there, they took this on to build out their MVP and then be a part of the accelerator. And then now they're still expanding even more. And I think they've raised their, I'm not exactly sure, I haven't been super up to date with them, but it just goes to show that there's a lot of potential, even from what you've done so far, to take that into the future and see where it'll take you. Any questions there? All right, let me just check times. Okay, and so the last section we'll dive into here is where to go from now. Yes.
You talk a lot about like profit and like money and stuff. So like, how do you make the most money? In your opinion?
I wish I knew. I'd say it's a good question. So I'd say it all comes down to finding people who believe in you. And so bigger companies that have money that want to support you, and at least in this stage, finding ways to use those. And that's why at the end of the day, I know I've said like there are a few key ideas that I've said, like at the end of the day, this is what matters or something else matters. But to me, at least, if you find your mission and you understand how you want your DApp to help change the world and how it can make people's lives better, if you can convince other people who believe in that same idea that you're doing that and improving life for more than just a small group of people, then they'll support you and back you, and then they'll help you with your user base, and you can expand from there. And so finding similar philosophies with other people and other companies that are looking to support you. And so a lot of the times those are VCs or different incubators, accelerators, whatever it may be, just companies, resources that'll help you grow. I wish I had a better answer for you, because if so, I'd be doing it too, and I'd probably make a lot of money from that, but it's a great question. Yeah.
From your experience, what's the best way to systematically learn about tokenomics?
Learn about what?
About tokenomics, because from my personal experience, it's been very disciplinary subject involving like economics, a little bit, game theory, a little bit, even theoretical mathematics. Like, do you have any suggestion about going?
Yeah, I'm looking to wrap up. I'm doing research, so I'm looking to wrap up that research. It's on stakeholder incentives, so that a lot of that ties into tokenomics and comparing what works in traditional finance systems with decentralized finance. And so I'd say I'll send you my research if you want when it's all finished. But more than that, also looking into different market factors and economic principles that apply in different finance, and using those and seeing how they are transferred over to DeFi. Because without having a party that runs everything and organizes everything, then it distributes a lot of power, or it distributes a lot of the responsibility, but you can use that to your advantage by providing what banks used to provide, and that at times comes from liquidity. And so that's liquidity. It's just the idea that if you provide assets or like anything that can help support a network, then they'll reward you for that. Just like by having your money in a bank account, they'll pay interest in that. The same thing applies to DeFi. And so finding that, kind of revisiting for starters what motivates people, which more than just profit, what exactly will users want to do given a certain set of options. You can use that to transition from there and learn about how DAOs, how different organizations are structured to align these incentives. And so I'd say kind of more tangibly, if you read white papers and see what they do on the econ side, like keep an eye out for some keywords, like even just looking at for tokens or stakeholders and like incentives, liquidity, yield farming. If you look up like any of the big DeFi keywords, which I can talk to you after if you want to talk more about this, then you can find like the key sections of white papers or of resources that will describe tokenomics. Okay. Any other questions?
I might have some if the class doesn't.
I
could throw in a few. I could throw in a few actually. I would first echo. Maybe I'll jump on stage with you. Hold on one sec. Awesome. I would echo that for sure. The point, at least I hope for a lot of the class, isn't about making the most money, but providing the most value. because money follows value. There's one thing I would really encourage all the class that I thought was really inspirational. If you guys like podcasts, Lex Friedman does a podcast with the CEO of Pfizer and talks about the vaccine and the rollout of the vaccine. And their mission basically was like, before any government grants came in, was we're going to dump all of our like eggs in one basket. We have to make this vaccine. We have to make it now. And the money didn't make sense. All the financiers and everyone was like up in arms, like, this is crazy. You can't do this. They did it anyway, and they provided a bunch of value. And now look at the money following. So like, something to put in your mind there, I think. And all of those things you mentioned, tokenomics in general, it's a really interesting area of study. But in my mind, it's not crazy different than just economics and finance in general. The only difference here is that we have this new primitive that we get to be our own banks, right? Like the power can be in the end user, but all the economic primitives are roughly the same. They just move a lot faster. And there's no BS, right? You can't cheat the chain. You might be able to cheat the code, like if it's a bad code, but you can't cheat the code if it's doing what it should. So that's kind of interesting things to think about that you couldn't necessarily do before. But so all that said, I really appreciated the second half of your presentation, Nate. And in particular, I had some questions related to some of the things you're talking about, like pro tips, kind of about design of dApps in general. What do you think are the best like tips and tricks and tools to enable progressive decentralization, especially as you're moving from this like MVP centralized little thing into like maybe this runs on its own and lives forever and is in the cloud for perpetuity? Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so I'd say generally, I talked a little bit about different ways to transition into decentralization. And so I'd say any mentality where you can use profit and tokenomics to, well, even that, but also encourage like something that's often slept on and people don't really tap into as much as they could, is the idea of community and community good, because there's a lot of power towards people wanting to help other people. And you'd be surprised by how much this can influence and drive people. And so if you can find a way where and I mean, like I said, this just all goes back to mission. If you have a general philosophy that people agree with and they believe in on the user side, then they're going to want to support it and they're going to want to put their time and effort into helping out and ensuring that it takes off. Because from there, then they know that what they hope to see in the world is happening. And so they are the change they want to see in the world by contributing little by little. And so even you can find really small ways for users to help out with this. But when they do, they have this feeling that they're making a difference and that they don't necessarily always need to be fully motivated by profit, because they can use other ideas like moral persuasion to encourage and just like ways to convince people to act honestly, or just generally finding ways and building a sense of community. And that's why, like what Tim said, having ideas of community managers and developers, ways people to foster community can be so important. So
that's super wise words, man. Like I totally agree. I wonder though, like, so yeah, the community is supportive, and really one of the coolest things that we see out of game theory that comes into all this stuff is you can make basically behavioral change, right? So the idea is to design some game in which everyone is doing something for good or evil, right? This could be to save the world or destroy it, right? Like, or anywhere in between. But I wonder then, like more specifically, are you familiar with like this exit community idea that's been tossed around kind of the Web3 communities?
Sort of. Well, let's hear it from you.
Yeah. So the idea exit to community is effectively embracing that the community is the central core, and that's actually where all the value lies in a lot of these applications, and that funds and things that are raised in a centralized manner eventually are distributed out to the people who are actually using this application, who then become effectively like a union owner. Like it looks more, I guess, communistic or socialistic even, where people are then owners in this protocol in some way, right? And there is no like founding body anymore. Maybe there was some original dividends that they're paid, but that is historical and it doesn't happen anymore. So I wonder if you had thoughts on that or have seen any of this happen out in the wild.
Yeah, so normally I'm trying to think about some good examples of this, but actually I'm gonna come back to this. I'm gonna think a little bit and then we can chat about this a little bit, but I think that is is like the end goal. That is the end goal too, is to have community be the ones to fully take over and keep everything running and
Well,
have them also excited to do so. That's the
think
big thing too.
At least I got a big heartthrob for all that philosophy, but at the same time, like there's a great question in class. It's just how do I make the most money for me and my company? And I don't think that's something we should put shade on either. It's like you're building a great tool and you're selling something that somebody wants. It's cool. It doesn't have to be just like this ephemeral thing that it's for the world, you know. But it is really cool that like cultural vibe is here, and I hope that persists no matter what happens. But more like technically, I did have another question. It's like, what criteria do you use for what needs to be on chain and what doesn't? So like we talked about this like idea of separation of concerns, what could be potentially centralized, maybe something decentralized, but like not on a blockchain. And like I would ask that in two different lights. One is like what absolutely has to be on chain, mission critical at every transaction, and what can kind of be in this transitionary state, like you talked about Lightning Network and payment channels, where there might be some funny business you can get away with, but you're off chain sort of kind of, versus things that can be totally off chain, doesn't matter.
Yeah, so I'd say most of what we have at the beginning after MVP, anything that allows for, I guess the way I think about it, and this is why it's tricky, because there isn't necessarily a black and white, but the gray area comes from what needs to be, like, how was I going to phrase it? Essentially, like, the things you want to keep on chain are the ones, like pretty much components in general, that are essential to keeping decentralization. And so it all depends on what stage your decentralization is in, and that's why there isn't a direct correlation for what exactly you need. I'd say things you must need are a lot of the times transactions, and like transactions pretty, I'd say 95 to 100% of the time need to be on chain. The exceptions for those are when you're using other like tokens that aren't fully like essential to the main structure and the underlying infrastructure of your network, whatever it may be. And so it's tricky because I don't know if I have a great answer for this, because it depends so much on the stage that your DApp is in, and also what you're looking to expand. And at times you might take things off chain to cut costs that you'll want to contribute and add back on chain, and you'll realize you don't need them for your MVP. And so let me get back to you on this a little bit. I'll try to craft a better answer.
No, it's good. Just ideas to put in the seat of maybe for all of us, because this is stuff I like struggle with all the time. And I hope that the engineers out there in the world and the people who are building out dApps in general, like you think about these kind of things, is it matters for sure. So thank you for all that. And yeah, I'll get out of the way. Let's keep going.
Great. So we just have one section left.
Let's share a screen.
Oh, is it not shared?
Yeah.
I'll let you do that.
No problem. Yes, we just gotta really quickly hit share. Yes, no problem.
Cool. Okay, so the last section of this will just figure out where you can go from here. And so the reality is that you've like all taken this class and all gotten into like blockchain development, but it might not be something you're interested in going forward. And that being said, you might have done it for a little bit and you might be interested in other ways to get involved in the blockchain space. And the exciting part is that this is all just the tip of the iceberg, because there's so much to explore. Like even when I was working earlier trying to figure out everything that I could even just think of ways to get involved with blockchain, I couldn't even think of everything. And so for starters, there's a ton that you can explore in a new blockchain field. And so this is just kind of general advice for things, like at least what I would do if I would start over again, ways to learn about blockchain and figure out what in the blockchain space I want to check out next. And so just kind of this like not even close to an exhaustive list, but just a bunch of things you can keep in mind and touch on. But if you were looking for new ways, maybe check out a conference. You can take classes, which you're all doing, so that's a great start there. And then something that's a lot less difficult than it sounds is applying for a blockchain internship. A lot of times, a lot of internships that attract more like finance students are more in crypto, but there are a lot of technical opportunities, technical and non-technical opportunities to get some hands-on industry experience. And so feel free to come talk to me after if you want some questions, and I can maybe tailor like a path towards you of like based off of what you might want to get out of an internship. And so That's something that's really cool about blockchain internships as well, is that they are less so, like they can be more goal oriented. And because it's such a new field, you can join a startup and have really tangible impact. And you can figure out what goals or what skills you want to get out of that internship and go from there. And companies will cater towards you. Yeah.
Is there like a website for blockchain career diversity?
Sorry, website for what?
Is there like a website for the internship postings or career postings regarding?
Yeah, I can send some over. I'm trying to think. I'd say so. Actually, a great way to find some internships is through the network that the Accelerator has, because it is a lot of like either like anywhere from like in college, right out of college, to people who have had decades of career experience who are all working blockchain startups or companies. And so a fun way, actually a really great way to find teams to reach out to would be to check out the kind of new batch. And if you're looking to intern for them, there are a lot of other companies that have gone through the Accelerator that can provide some cool opportunities. And so I'll send all of the old batch information out after, or I'll pass it on to you too, if you're interested in looking at some other like blockchain startups that are involved with the Berkeley ecosystem. So I'll pass that on. I'd say like, check out different workshops. There are a lot of workshops online too, remote ones that are free and easy to check out. You can learn a new language, whether it be, I mean, you've all learned for the most part Solidity, but if you're interested in exploring, there are a lot of other opportunities for finding ways to make yourself marketable as an intern. Yeah.
What do you mean by supply chain?
These are just different kind of subcategories of blockchain. It's pretty much using blockchain to track. It's the supply chain use case. So it's using blockchain to track the progression of assets, or like the shipments, by manufacturing, all the components that go from getting something from one place to another. So take an online dev tutorial, reach out to industry experts, or just email me. So I'll attach all my information there, but feel free to reach out to me about anything. I'm happy to talk and support all of you however I can. I'm gonna stop sharing. Go ahead. So here's some other courses to keep in mind. So full disclosure, these are all courses that I've been involved with in some capacity, but I'd say if you're still wanting to learn more, these are great classes to take. And so for me, like I taught blockchain fundamentals all of last year, and it's developed the foundation that I've been able to use to have a conversation with anyone in industry about blockchain. And so just from that one course, that gave me such a great like launching point. So if you're interested in taking that, if you haven't already, that can be a great class. Half of you have taken blockchain for developers, half of you have taken this class. So maybe consider the other one, or even dive into like something that's a new field. And so this is the decentralized finance class that was offered in the fall. It'll be offered again, I'm pretty sure, next fall. But there's also an online MOOC, so massive open online course version that has all the recordings from the past semester. So you can check out any subfield that you're interested in and watch a lecture, and it's all really easy. And you can take a quiz on it and test your knowledge. So there's a lot of resources. And if these Berkeley courses aren't enough, there are a few more that you can take. So like I said, these will all be posted. So these are all classes, not just in CS, but ones that are all under like Berkeley RDI, which is a Center for Responsible Decentralized Intelligence. And it hones on finding ways to use a lot of like blockchain, DeFi, and just the whole general idea of like decentralization to expand to different fields. And I definitely say if you're interested, check out RDI and see what they've been up to, because it's a relatively new program, but they've been doing some really great things. And then if you're looking for easy ways to talk to people, attend these community ecosystem events. I believe they're every month up at SCET. And so if you get a chance, swing by, meet some startup founders, meet some people who work in industry. There's a really diverse group of people who are at different stages in their blockchain experience. And so it's a great way to learn. And then finally, one last thing, which I'd highly recommend if you haven't thought about it so far, consider applying to blockchain at Berkeley. It's a really great club, and to me, it probably was one of the most meaningful experiences I've had at Berkeley, just being involved with it. And so there will be applications in the fall. So if you have any questions about it, you can reach out to me, or you can email me, or like any of us that are in the club. And hopefully it'd be great to see you apply in the fall. Okay, any questions about anything there?
What's your favorite protocol?
Favorite protocol? For what? I mean, it's for me, everything's goal oriented. I like how I'm going to give a pretty kind of lame answer and say Ethereum, but I just think that everything that EVM has
How about
is specific.
protocol, not
Yeah, I'd say I'm a big fan of Polkadot. I haven't done a ton with it personally, but I know that. I mean, I got to meet Gavin Wood a little while ago. He's the one who started it, and talk to him about it. And so just hearing his whole mission, his whole life story about how he progressed into creating it, and then what he's been able to do with it was pretty inspiring. And so that's given me an appreciation for it. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, well, that's it for me. So thank you, everyone. That's it. Thanks for listening.
Great stuff. Thank you so much, Nate.
Great.
I think that was really splendid. And I want to thank you again for all of this great insight and all those resources. Like, I know I'm kind of mostly an outsider to Berkeley, and I'm really excited to have this little insight that you've given here. I might just steal a lot of those links out of your slides and put it on our website for our effective MOOC-ified version of what this class is, because there's some great stuff going on here. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I would say thank you too. So Dan didn't really know what I was going to be presenting on until a few minutes before. So thanks for the little leap of faith there too.
Super valuable. Absolutely. So I guess for the class, if you don't have any other questions, I would encourage you, we've got a little bit more time potentially here to mix. We got two classes, two powerhouse people from maybe you've not met before. And I would encourage that the blockchain developers really get to know some of these teams and what they're building. So I know these guys are trying to practice their pitches. So if you want to spend a little bit of time giving this your little 2 or 3 minute spiel, it might be worthwhile in small groups, to tell people what you're up to and maybe entice some engineers to come and join your team. Maybe. But then I guess the last thing I wanted to leave with announcement wise is next week at this time, I believe it's going to be at SCET. Is that correct, Manon? Do we know? For the technical presentation? Okay. So at SCET, we're going to gather, and I'll be there in person again, and we're going to do a technical demonstration. So I would encourage any of the developers who are in the class too to come to those, because it might be more curious about the architecture and design of these decentralized applications that our class is building, kind of diving a little bit into the what they built and why they built it. And I'd love to have you guys there. So open invitation at SCET this time next week. And for our class, I would really encourage you guys to take this time to give a product demo that you will show off basically to people who are more technically experienced, so we can help poke holes maybe in some of the architecture that you're putting together. This culminates then, and Tim announced this, the technical deliverable just after the final presentations, centers around having this really fully functional design document, right? So just understanding what kind of user interactions you're going to have on your application and explaining how you're going to address those. So I like to call it extended, because the functional requirements document typically is just what do I need to do? That's it, right? So tell us a little bit about how you're going to do it, rough game plan. So I'll be really excited to look at these things with you, because I know a lot of these MVPs are still in a really early phase, and this will help you at least scope, if not already start implementing some more core features. And I would encourage you guys, look back on this presentation. Nate presented some really good fundamental concepts, things that you can go and explore. So maybe those leading edges into things that you could maybe integrate into your apps and change some of the architecture fundamentally, hey, those payment channel things are pretty cool. Maybe there's a way you could use those for NFTs or something. I don't know. So something to consider. And with that, I think I'm done speaking. I don't know if we have anything else.
Yeah. So once again, we can give a huge round of applause for Nate. Woo. Yeah. And so for some final announcements for our DApp course, again, as Dan was stating, we have our technical final deliverable next Tuesday. And then on Thursday in the Sibley Auditorium, from 6:30 to 9 p.m., we will be having our final pitches. So that will be very exciting. And we are super excited to see everything that you guys have been working on this entire semester and presenting it there. So again, that is an open invitation for anyone who also wants to attend. But again, it's for the DApp students who are presenting their projects. We also have next week on Monday, it is the blockchain at Berkeley, the community ecosystem meetup that we were talking about earlier. So that's next Monday. So I know we've had conflicts with the DApp course and that, but this time next Monday, it is not a conflict. So it would be great for all of you guys to attend if you can.
Yeah.
And lastly, the attendance code, what we have for the DApp classes, B for blockchain at Berkeley. And just for reference for you guys in the blockchain and developers class, is there attendance or?
Yes, the attendance code is decentralized.
Okay.
And there's no homework for blockchain for developers.
Yes, no.
Awesome. Yeah. So with that, thank you guys for coming, and this would be great time for all of you guys who are in the different courses to interact and kind of share your projects. So it'd be great to form little different circles and great to get to know each other. So yeah, thank you all for coming.
See you next week, guys.
Awesome.
I'll be there in person.
Great.
All right.
See you later.
Bye,
Awesome.
everybody.
Thanks. All right.